Thank you very much. Analyst in the studio this morning for a fresh Monday, for a fresh start to a new month. We have Tunde Okufi at Big Coops. Good morning.
Morning, Valentine.
Welcome.
Morning, Noel.
Morning.
And Namdi himself. That's Namdi AK on Twitter. Good morning.
Good morning, Lagos.
Welcome. All right, so let's start this story. The first one from Tunde. Lagos police impound 188 motorcycles, 78 tricycles as enforcement of ban begins. That was to take effect, or well, it took effect from the 1st of February, right? We see that Okadas, tricycles are almost non-existent on the roads. I say almost because this morning I still saw bikes.
Yeah. Just a trickle.
Your thoughts, please.
I mean, so finally, I finally understand why there was ridiculous traffic on Thursday and Friday to begin with, because I left rather late. I left work rather late on Thursday and Friday, and I couldn't explain the traffic. The ban on bikes and tricycles has had a knock-on effect on transportation generally within the city. You find large amounts of people waiting at bus stops or generally along the road, as you know, we often don't have structured bus stops, but you find people waiting along the road, and it has also had a knock-on effect on the cost and price. So the downfalls or the minibuses have increased their prices. Some say to the quantum of 500%
Exactly.
in some
Which is very worrisome.
Oh dear.
Then obviously, of course, that has a knock-on effect on even the ride-hailing services, because literally it's surged throughout. People need to move around, so sometimes the state realize or look at how integral this means of transportation is to moving and getting people around the city, right? Also, the thinking behind this, it would also be useful for us to even understand the clear thinking. Initially, when bike bans, so it's not like it's exactly new. When bike bans were initially being touted, it's because they were used heavily in robberies and security related incidents. So they said, okay, we'll limit the time that bikes were used. First of all, started with they can't operate within such and such times, and then it went to other areas. So it's I haven't actually heard the reason for this blanket ban on them in certain local government areas. That's on the one hand. Then think about the impact this is having, not just on so we looked at the economy in terms of the lives of the people, but then in terms of the economy of the state and the city. A number of people have made investments in the sector, also based on the policy position of the government. The governor, I remember at least I attended an event, the platform, where the governor spoke about transportation within the city. And one of the things he spoke about, or he mentioned that they're doing, was that, all bike riders or anyone operators would have numbers and will be known. So we'll move away from the time when we have, bottom line saying that we'll move away from the unstructured nature of it to a more structured nature now, where you have platforms, who run these services, and that was the way to go forward. People took a position and took a cue from that. I couldn't find if I find a group infographic, I'll put it up on Twitter. A number of these guys invested huge amounts in this. They got serious funding from private equity funding to run and operate these things. And then we talk about, attracting investment. We can't attract investment when we keep flopping on policy, right?
Yes. Just allow me to add, as in closing in your statements, to ask you really, do you think this is in some way a move by the government to check the immigration of certain personalities
No.
coming from different parts?
I'm sorry, no, I'm not going to into Lagos. So I've heard that theory that most of the Okada riders, let's just call it as it is, that most of the Okada riders are northern and they're trying to keep
or even coming from outside Nigeria.
From outside Nigeria. Come on now, that's to me. I don't want. I don't want to give them that level of. I don't give them that as an out. It's just irresponsible.
All right.
Right.
Very practically, this morning a number of our staff haven't arrived, and I believe that it's due to this as well.
Can I just drop something on there? I really do think that this ought to have been better scheduled. You don't just bring the ban and impose it, unilaterally
Yeah,
all at
one off.
once.
And
Phase
that's
it
what
out. That's all.
Vincent is saying on WhatsApp. He says the Okada ban, though a good thing done by the Lagos State. However, Lagosians are stranded this morning at the bus stops. The government should have banned the Okada first, then the tricycles.
I struggle to see how it's a good thing. And then how does it affect delivery bikes? They're businesses that are built on this. It's a knock-on effect. People who deliver goods. Every nation is built up by SMEs. A number of people rely on delivery bikes to move their
Have you
produce. They say it's exempt. Yeah.
It's
In
exempt,
fact, I'd even
yes.
shared that information with people saying it's
Yeah.
exempt. And when they asked me for, my source, and I started struggling looking for, I realized that it's hearsay. We really don't, there's nothing, there's no
So it's not
position
clear.
saying that, courier bikes are exempt.
All right,
Alright.
thank you. MI from Akoka says,
They said we want to move from a code to Big Apple by one single policy. Could it work? So this is a lazy approach to urbanization. Policy flip-flop and FDI, foreign direct investment, aren't in the same WhatsApp group. So much for ease of doing business. Investment destination, my smartphone.
Actually,
That's what MI says.
I wonder what the ease of doing business secretariat thinks about this and if they are lobbying the Lagos state government in terms of, because that's what they're pushing, they've been promoting it from the center.
We have a
And
theory
to
around
see
this.
that-
Who pays
There's
the
a lot of
piper?
money, in government, we're looking for money generally, and there's a lot of money coming to that industry. So I'm sorry, to me, I kind of view it like a shakedown.
All right, Yinka says, in as much as our hearts and prayers go out to those waiting endlessly at the bus stops, we need to be candid. These keke and okadas have become a nuisance around us. The painful part is that the commuters never seem to correct their operators to behave sensibly while on the road. These are the same ones screaming at the insensitivity of the government. Why is a bike hailing service on a third mainland bridge? Yinka, yes, we understand your sentiments. Also consider that the majority of the commuters still use these services to get to
services. And
work
what people
their
have called
destination.
for is regulation rather than an outright ban.
All right, let's move on to this next story. Nnamdi. Pension funds should be invested, not borrowed. That's what a group is calling for. The Center for Pension Rights Advocacy, they said the funds under the contributory pension scheme are meant to be invested and not borrowed. Speaking to what the government plans to do with these funds. Your thoughts, please.
Right. So somehow, Big Koof's got all the juicy ones. I won't say why that happened. But this is, I won't call it a known story. Sorry. For anybody who's really interested, I'll try and give a background, right? Now, the way pension fund works is, as we all know, you make certain contributions as an employee and your employer makes certain contributions. They all go into one pot. And then you have pension managers, pension fund administrators who put those funds together and use them for investments. They have fiduciary relationships with the employees and employers who are making contributions because the pension fund works as a kind of trust. So you're holding that money in trust. When somebody retires, they get their payout based on what's in the pot and how much they contributed. The equations they use to calculate everything. Now, of course, I understand what the story is saying. It's saying that you would imagine that if you have a pension fund brimful of money for the future that everybody's expecting will benefit them in their retirement, then you would be investing it so that you can grow that pot, so that you can make the yield a lot more interesting for those who are going to participate in the future. However, I know you all remember the story of how the government has, I don't know if they made plans to or if they already have taken some money out of
To fund infrastructure.
yes.
Yeah,
I think I
that's
remember
what they
that they
reacted
made
That's
a
it.
borrowing, and I can only imagine that that borrowing was based on some kind of interest rate. So I'm no economist, but I do think maybe you could say that in its own way is a little bit of, it's a kind of investment if you're still going to get returns on it. But that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I understand the real story at the back, which is that don't abuse these monies and then tell us stories in the future about our retirement plan and how there's no money in the fund because obviously you're unable to repay. So I understand what the Center for Pension Rights Advocacy is advocating at this point. I really do think that there's so many other sources of funds and you might want to leave people's retirement plans alone.
Thank you very much, Nnamdi, for your apt analysis on this one. We'll move on very quickly to touch on this story from Premium Times. United States travel ban, presidency reacts, sets up committee. Well, I've been waiting for this reaction since last week. As the news broke, we heard on the 31st of January, the last day of the month, the United States Department of Homeland Security released reports based on the analysis on over 200 countries around the world. They only identified about 7 of them, including Nigeria and Kyrgyzstan and some other countries, saying that there's restriction on visa. I mean, we need to make it clear. It's a restriction on permanent visa, permanent residency.
exactly.
So, but temporary residency is still given according to their recommendations. But today, please go through this story, especially highlighting some of the metrics that they use to, single out these countries. Some things that include information sharing, identity management, information and terrorism, and public safety risk.
Yeah. So I mean, globally, I mean, if to start at that point, globally, there are a bunch of data points that are collected on or assessed for countries. And these things typically come up when people apply for visas, or whenever you're in transit. A number of databases. If when you submit your when you go to the airport to travel and you present your passport and they scan it, which is why all countries are transition to like electronic passports.
That's right.
The details hit a variety of databases, and if anything pops up, then they know how to handle you, for instance. But any database is as good as, or any data source is as good as the information submitted to it, right? So we apparently have been doing the best that we can, or as well as we should, in the data that we present. And they made this apparently they raised this with us. Incidentally, Chad also would have fallen in this category, according to which newspaper?
Punch, yes.
That Chad too would have fallen within this travel ban, but they reacted to it on time, or slightly they responded.
They responded because they sent a message to all these embassies,
exactly.
to these
So
countries.
we react.
We reacted, yeah.
They
So
act.
they responded, right? We didn't respond, and our response, as you had asked us to set up a committee, we established a committee, as we always do, to study and address the updated. What are you studying?
What are you
Clear.
studying? Because thank you very much. I went to the website of Department of Homeland Security and I saw the one pager.
It's in English.
It's in English.
And we
clear
claim that English is our formal
They give you the
language,
clear
right?
categories. They tell you the timeline that they give these countries to respond
Exactly.
to this request.
And although everyone, although the media, not just local but internationally, has labeled it a travel ban, it's not so much a travel ban. It focuses on categories for settlement, immigration categories where you're going to go and settle in the US. And anyone who follows America, even mildly follows Trump and his policy on immigration, knows that he wants to prevent people from putting down roots, so to say. So, for instance, Val, if you were in the US, you're based in the US, and you have maybe your children in Nigeria or your parents in Nigeria, today, generally, general US law is that you can bring them over. There's a procedure and process to bring them over.
Yeah.
Trump wants to stop that and block that. And that's what this affects. So, categories for immigration and settlement is what is blocking, but business visas and tourist visas and medical visas will still be issued. We all know that it will become that much tougher, no doubt, as people have experienced, but it's not an out and right and complete ban. So if we want to get out of this, let our governments respond to the criteria that, if Chad
Yes,
can get out of it, then I expect that we should also be able
could
to.
have gotten out.
Because let's give it a perspective
Yeah.
before you drop it. I mean, if you look at, we've analyzed the different criteria that they put out to screen candidates who are applying for visas. We know that usually, if you have 1,000 or more people applying for a visa, it's not almost impossible, or it's not always possible to go through each and every one person. So they do like an analysis of a bunch, but that's based on the level of trust they have for the government. If they have the compliance to providing the documentation
And they trust the
outside
data
passport.
that's coming.
Thank you very much. So, it will be more tasking to go through each one, which is why it will come as no surprise if you reject it.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just going to say, I want to draw a line between this and the story that was taken on this program last time I was here, or I think a couple of times ago, about the ECHO. And how Nigeria suddenly, at the last minute, having had oversight of the process for years,
says we're looking at it. We're studying it.
This is really just an
Other
admission of
countries are
fault. We have not taken the time before now to prepare. Now we were caught slipping. We have to try our best to catch up. That's what it is.
All right, thank you very much, Namdi. We have this from Z-Man on Twitter. Only privileged that car owners, Lagosians, would applaud the intensive manner in which kekes and bikes were banned. No palliatives, no alternative means of transportation for the common man. Highly insensitive. And then Yomi Akarakiri says, sanitize then regulate. I support the Okada ban 100%. David Edem then says, the blanket ban on Okada and tricycle by Lagos state government without alternatives is totally unacceptable and cruel.
What about structuring it?
Yeah.
Running.
On WhatsApp, Dr. I comes in to win the travel ban or travel restriction story. He says, hello, so the travel ban story puts to rest the propaganda that it's ordinary Nigerians that cost ignoring the failure of government. That cost it's ignoring the failure of the government. The wider picture is how our security is very poor.
True. And then we have this. Kindly put your name when you send your message. You would help us read it. Chima says, our countries that our people are made up of a number of people who can't have a well organized Lagos. The people are in plight. I think the government ran out of ideas in managing security and traffic issues in Lagos. I pray we don't have more problems as we want to solve the Okada and Keke ban.
All right. Let's go quickly to this message, this story rather, Tunde. Guardian newspaper reports that why Nigeria won't close borders over coronavirus by minister and NIS. So the Nigerian Immigration Service, they last week announced that they are putting in stringent measures to conduct rigorous screening at the ports of entry, just to check the coronavirus, especially for people coming in from the Asian parts of the world. But what are your thoughts regarding their stance on the land borders?
Should I be cheeky? I thought our borders were closed.
Yeah, but they're not. We know they're not.
Okay, so in the context of coronavirus, I think there's only one country that has done that, and I mean you can understand why they. You can understand the position they're in. They probably don't need the money. It's the U.S. that I'm aware of have officially said if you've been to China or you've been around China or you're Chinese, you can't come. Only people who have only people who have relatives within the U.S. and have can come, but they'll be quarantined for a period. Most of the West hasn't. I mean, the UK hasn't. Everyone is taking and putting in place protocols, which is what we're saying, that we're putting in protocols. We're not going to just, shut them all out. And look, the truth is, we need that exchange. A lot of Nigerians go to, there's a lot of trade that happens between Nigeria and China. A lot of our people go there for produce and business. A lot of Chinese, a lot of our infrastructure projects are, as slowly as they are being implemented, however, are being implemented by Chinese companies. Even Dangote at his refinery and a bunch of other places employs huge amounts of Chinese. So we have a lot of Chinese nationals coming in. It's a bit difficult to then put a blanket, ban on them without affecting. It would be like the Okada ban in a sense. You get what I mean? But we should have protocols in place, and that's what they're describing. They said initially they had relied on the WHO for the regions required to even test. So if they notice that you look funny, this is standard in any airport. It should be anyway. If you look a little unwell, or your health travel card doesn't show that you've taken certain vaccines, they'll move you aside and test. Regardless of an epidemic, that's what should happen. We didn't have the reagents which are the chemicals required to test for positive coronavirus. Now we do, and we don't have to rely on the WHO for that. So that's improvement.
That's good.
There are protocols around screening people, but I don't think we have any protocols or procedures for actually quarantining people and holding them for a period.
It's personal.
Facilities.
So it's going to be done by the people themselves. So if you just recently returned from China, you're advised or you're mandated to
quarantine yourself
at home
and then infect other people at home who you don't quarantine by extension, please. And that point speaks to an epidemic outbreak readiness. Yes. The WHO has a measure that they measure, and you'd be surprised at how many countries are actually not ready. The US is one. I think Finland, no African countries, obviously. I think Finland, but generally wealthy nations. And the UK is not in it, for instance. Right. But it's only a handful of countries that can deal with the real epidemic. I mean, guys, think Resident Evil. It's not too far off.
Thank you. We have messages on YouTube. Abiola Isaac says, good morning. Yes, I agree that outright ban in some areas is needed, but there is need to restrict it to the expressways and the bridges, and to ensure all Okada operators across the states are registered.
Great conversation and suggestions by some people, and I think we should take this to Lagos Talks 9
Yes,
so if you'd like to send in your comments, make sure you join the conversation at 9 a.m. Namdi, let me come to you for this next one, and it talks about peace constituting committees on recruitment for community policing. according to this day newspaper. Now, this is a response to Amotekun. Now, the federal government is taking action. The IG of Police has given directives to commissioners of police across the state that they should constitute committees that would look at getting volunteers and engaging with local leaders. Please take us to this story.
I don't really know what to think about this particular story. What I'm looking at right now is an order from the Inspector General to all state commissioners of police, assistant commissioners of police, and divisional police officers to liaise with their traditional rulers and community leaders, screen some volunteers between the ages of 21 and 50, and try to constitute some alternative policing mechanism to, of course, the mainstream Nigeria police force. However, I do recall, I think a friend of mine, I think something like this already exists. A friend of mine actually went and got screened and went through a 3 or 4 day training, got a badge, a uniform and a beret, and I think he was labeled a police supernumerary, which is sort of a title they give you when it's like a version of special duties. You know, you're entitled to do a number of things beyond wielding a weapon. But the entire story is littered with tales from all across the country of people expressing their readiness on different levels to get volunteers. They want to get 400,000 volunteers across the country who will eventually be fully fledged, I suppose, police supernumeraries. But what really is this community policing going to affect, you know, day to day? If I think about it, I think if I recall this friend of mine, and I'm sorry to be spilling the beans on live radio, he wanted that badge to be able to get through certain checkpoints, you know, while going interstate. So when you flash your police supernumerary badge or your special status, and they see you, they recognize you as one of their own, and they let you through. Now, I can only imagine the level of abuse, you know, people who would want to get a certain level of status or access or whatever by virtue of being part of this community policing unit. That's on the one level. On the other level, I can only think about how the process itself, which should, if you're putting together a community policing outfit, you need to be training them properly, equipping them possibly, I guess, with batons, letting them know what kind of courage they have to assert in times of danger, reminding them of, or having them ready to be deployed, I suppose, for riot control and so on in particular areas. Maybe you have a person who's able to show up once or twice a month to deal with particular areas where you've already identified that there is a level of unruliness. But I'm sure what will eventually happen is you go through this elaborate screening procedure, you recruit all these volunteers, and then nothing.
Thank you very much.
I'm just curious to see exactly where it's going. It sounds like a great measure. It also sounds like a political response, but it doesn't really, to me, sound like something that will be effective.
They're not shying away from the fact that, I don't think they're shying away from the fact that it's a response to having a central community police initiative, you know, different from Amotekun, so that there's no need for regional community policing. And I love the fact that you highlighted the abuse of power. In the next story we're going to look at is going to talk about the framework of Amotekun and how the Southwest is actually planning an anti-graft team to check these excesses you've mentioned. Maybe we'll take some comments and then I'll ask Tunde please to take us through that story in the Punch newspaper. The update on Amotekun is that the state in the Southwest, their state assemblies are in the process of writing bills and submitting bills to their House of Assembly to ensure that Amotekun then becomes a part of their law, it becomes legal. But let's take some comments before then.
So Dami sent in a message on WhatsApp reacting to the pension fund story where the federal government says they're going to invest or use the money, borrow the money. He said, it's a non-story, and that Center for Whatever, which is, they call themselves Center for Pension Rights Advocacy. They say it sounds fake and not very smart. It's an investment, not a kind of investment.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. Tune, please, can you take us through the story from the Punch newspaper?
So I guess in this story, it's almost an admission, right, in a sense that they know that this is fraught with challenges.
Yes.
And it's open in a sense to abuse.
Yeah.
Right. The whole Amotekun thing, I haven't commented, I haven't had the point to comment on it throughout. The whole Amotekun thing throws up so many questions, right? this is community policing,
Yeah.
right? It's just that I mean, maybe it's been branded. It's very southwestish, even in the label and the name, right?
Which I believe is deliberate.
Of course, it's
Yeah.
deliberate. You know, it's different from if you call them, you know, Lagos Metropolitan Police, for instance. Amotekun is different. Amotekun. So there's that. When people make that argument, people then say, okay, so why don't we restructure? I mean, making it even a national conversation, right? That they say that in Sharia states they have something, they have the equivalent of this. Now the eastern states are saying, no, we need to do this and that. Isn't this? Why we just scatter?
You know, we tried that some years
race
ago.
to the bottom.
No, it was tried some years ago.
So
I
it
mean,
feels like a
and
race to
then
the
that
bottom.
didn't work. There was a
And
there was a confab during
Yes,
GJ's
that
time.
we
And
done
then right
nothing
after
about.
that, they had the calls. It was getting louder and louder. The call for restructuring, and nothing was done because, on a wider sense, it seemed like it was a very painstaking effort.
It's almost like we don't have nation builders anymore, and things are just happening haphazard. So okay, so here we are. We now have Amotekun, where the southwestern states are say they're coming together, adamant about it. Remember, the Attorney General said, "Look, this thing is illegal and it's against principles of federalism." Da da da. They all sit down with the federal government, and everybody sits down and says, "Okay, do you know what? You guys start drafting laws within your states. You know, deal, go ahead in a sense." But my worry always with militias and a bunch of other things, and by the way, this is not entirely new. When we were in regions, the regions had their own police force, and we all know, and you can just go to review history, that a lot of that, it's not that it doesn't happen at the federal level, but a lot of those regional forces were used as tools in the hands of the region, the governors and rulers, within those regions. I worry that this may happen again. They'll be used as political tools and thugs. They will overstep their bounds, which is what this unit is supposed to help them manage. But this unit is within Amotekun itself.
But looking at the pros, if it works, that could be a template that federal government could borrow.
Yeah, if it
They're
works, it
already
can be a model.
borrowing it. This community policing idea now that's being cascaded down to commissioners of police in state and region is borrowed from Amotekun. So if anything, if there's nothing at all that we haven't gained from Amotekun, it's that it's propelled the federal government to work and take action in terms of community.
It's just the feeling that we don't know where we're going. We just bundle away in a path, down a path without clear vision.
Here's the question: what happens when in the future you have a Motekon and community policemen, and then they have some
matters of jurisdiction.
jurisdictional clash?
Yeah.
So person say me I be a Motekon, I want some police.
That's why the regulations or things, it should actually be in fine print, like not fine print.
And then what weapons would they carry? Like Namdi mentioned, would they carry batons, or we're going to proliferate more guns?
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
I have a message from Ayo in reaction to the same traffic, or rather tricycle ban. It says, guys, I'm at a bus stop and random people are offering children rides to school from Obalende to Osborne. It's a security risk.
Yes.
On that one, someone actually, I saw an interesting tweet early on during the weekend that some people should take advantage at this point. You know what they call locally kabu, those local cabs, so you can go in, inside. That people can use this as an opportunity. In the meantime, you can use your car very quickly and make some money.
And let's start carpooling. Lagosians, be a good neighbor to you.
Let's walk more.
Carpooling.
Right, still on security, Nandi. We look at what happened over the weekend. Now, some people saw some people holding placards yesterday going around, and others were wondering what's going on. Now, today's headline from New Telegraph explains that the Christian Association of Nigeria have launched a march yesterday protesting killings and asking the federal government to protect Nigerians. What's your take on this, please?
I'm sure you noticed that I put my sheets away.
Yes.
So let's just address this as what it is. It's a long story.
Yes.
A story about Christians coming together across the country, holding placards. Don't worry, I'll take less than a minute, but I promise you.
Yes.
Protesting, crying, wailing, praying, so that we stop killing each other in the country, saying everybody's human. There's nothing in this story, man. As far as I'm concerned, I think that if you're a Christian, you should be constantly engaged in prayer already. If you're going to demonstrate with purpose. Let's have a particular message framed in such a way that is directed at the right authorities who are stepping out of line, so that we know that you, as the Christian Association of Nigeria, are involved politically, as you should be. You have a deciding position. lots of people look to these Christian organizations for their direction and for mentorship and just to enable them sort of channel their frustrations. But what you have in the end is shams and shows and things that can make the papers. And somebody probably went and paid for this story. Sorry if I'm wrong.
It's almost all the
Do you
videos.
understand what I mean? So ultimately, I can't see what the functionality is.
All right.
Me personally,
All
I
right.
would not go on those marches.
Thank you, Namdi. Final message here from, please add your names to your messages so we can take them. And for those who sent in messages reacting to the bike ban and the tricycle ban, we're going to take that story extensively for 1 whole hour in Lagos Talks 981. That's the 9 o'clock hour. Thank you very much for listening. Tunde Okufi, thank you so much for stepping in this morning at Big Coves. And we have Nnamdi Eke on Twitter. Please, let's continue the conversation with the hashtag Freshly Pressed 981. Coming up next, we switch lanes to talk sports in the locker room.
The headlines.
He said our
The
last. Did you read
stories.
it?
What was that?
He said this is our last comment for today. So I was saying that you said it so that you should read it since you had mentioned that I'll take our last comment.
But yeah, the guy didn't prove me. Sorry.
What's that?
Oh, he says NOA.
Anyway.
Oh,
Look at this. This is 4 pages of print.
this one was
Nonsense.
sponsored.
No, it
first
wasn't.
of all.
So
No, the fact that it's
Nonsense.
all newspapers. this
no,
morning.
not all of them. So
Yeah.
not all. So the different angles, and that's what I'm saying.
stop issuing visas is different from preventing
Them
Yes.
from coming, yes.
people who already have
Have
visas.
Because this
to come.
is fake news as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Okay.
The guy
Yeah.
saying
So
that-
so the reason why initially I was debating whether to take it or not.
Yeah.
And then when I read the different articles, so there are different angles from different newspapers.
Yeah.
So a lot of the newspapers, all of them use Adeboye as a picture because it's a clickbait.
Yeah.
But this was the only one that used the real thing that was happening, which was that the Christian Association of Nigeria had called. And the reason why it was significant was that, and like what you said, even though we didn't have time, I'm going to debate that because
Yeah.
when you say that they should be politicized, others have also said they should have nothing to do with politics. Because we've had people like Father, what is that Father that
Mbaka.
Mbaka
Yeah.
in Imo State
Yeah.
that came out and was speaking about
Governor.
Uzodima. And so there's that argument of stay away from it. Don't even have an
as a black person,
yeah.
as a black person, anyone who argues that a religious organization should stay out of politics is
Doesn't
not
know-
aware
doesn't
of
know
the
the journey.
privilege as a black
Yeah, yeah,
person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apart from
Not aware-
privilege,
well,
even
Not
the
aware,
influence and
not aware of the journey.
You don't know
Yes.
the background.
exactly, or the influence of the power, and another criticism that has come to Khan in recent times that they've kept quiet for so long.
Yeah.
That the reason why the government would almost turn away when it happened in many Christian organizations is that we always
morning.
keep quiet. They never do
Yeah.
anything.
Very well.
Unlike
So we've separated state and church, yes, but church and
Ayo.
religion has a massive influence
Oh,
on the
yesterday was
formation
Sunday.
of states.
Mm.
All Western countries,
I told you I was coming
all
today.
without
I said
exception,
no.
were formed
Absolutely.
with
Our
the influence of
constitution
church, right?
is actually
Everything.
founded
I'll let you
on-
know.
You know,
But
everything. So you cannot
after
abdicate that
11.
responsibility,
You can't.
right?
You
And
can't.
all change needs to come from there. I mean, okay, so you can say Western
No
nations.
problem. Is this your number?
Yeah, Western nations have been
I'll
pretty
call
much
you when
formed.
I'm on my way.
Yeah.
But large
Right,
minorities within those states that have gotten rights have usually come from faith organizations saying
Yes,
that look,
absolutely.
things need to change, things need to be
Absolutely.
different.
The position Trump has at some
Look at
point
Jesse
in the
Jackson.
past was the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yeah.
Who was the Pope?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Do you understand? At some point, well, it was the Pope, and then he became an emperor. But yeah, at some point in the past, all of what we're sitting on today, the way organized government was Christian influenced.
yeah.
And even if you just check the numbers, the vast
Yes.
majority of people in Nigeria belong to one religious sect or
Or
the
the
other.
other.
And the influence
that
these
influence.
leaders have. When we have,
Yes.
even with community policing, they
Yeah.
can't have that without consulting
You
religious
can't.
leaders. They
You
can't.
can't.
Because they have, in fact, in some areas of Nigeria, religious leaders have more power than traditional leaders.
Of course,
So in terms of the
100%.
Obas, if the Oba tells you something and your pastor
Yeah.
tells you or imam, trust me, you obey your imam, or even traditional
course.
worshippers obey the
Yeah,
imam
yeah,
priest
Of course.
beyond their
100%.
tradition.
No,
So
no,
Can
100%.
you imagine the fact that every Nigerian president, I don't know what Buhari has, but since the return to democracy, has found their way into religious establishments
Of
to
course.
kneel down and get blessings.
not just in
Of course,
Nigeria.
Power. That
Not
power
just
alone.
in Nigeria,
Very
in the
true.
UK. When
Very true.
Damn,
David
Trump,
Cameron,
didn't Trump not
even
go
Trump,
boycotting
Yeah,
Malcolm
that's
when
right.
David
now?
Cameron was contesting, the only time during the election that they go for Festival of Life. During elections, they
He came.
acted
You lie.
Yeah, he went
Atem
to
Boris
Diwali.
Johnson, David Cameron,
You
because
lie.
it's a
Yeah.
large pool of black voters.
Do you know
And
how
the
many?
moment
Do you
they
know the
see that
strength
they're
in their part
introduced,
and
yes,
their
the moment they
numbers?
see that they're introduced, everybody say Boris Johnson is a Christian, I'm going to vote for him. That is it. Boris Johnson nails down for the
I
Joe
love
to
it.
pray for him.
You're lying.
Yes, so
I love
there's
it.
nowhere. So even America now, as horrible as Trump is, do you know
Yeah.
many Christians are supporting him? Why?
Yeah, no,
Because
they
of the
want-
The majority of the
evangelical.
Christians,
Yeah,
the
the
majority of the
evangelicals-
Christians
And-
support Trump.
Yes,
and
my
because
husband and
of-
I are
because
like
of
this.
the
My husband is
messages he's
Trump is God's
preaching.
will. I'm like, no, he's
Yeah.
not.
Pro-life, all
all
the
the things.
conservative,
Yeah.
Bible Belt leaning messages.
So
he's
that's
in
also
support.
it. So whether we like it or not, they're
You're
influential,
involved.
and then and they are also accused of going to Aso Rock to go and collect bags,
Of course.
and then they come out and they
And
don't
then they
say
go
anything.
silent.
Yeah, that's the
So
problem
it's
now. They
really, this
compromise
is the
themselves.
first time
They bought
in the
them off.
history of Cannes to react like this, and
But the
In fact,
reaction.
anyone who says anyone who says that they shouldn't be involved also doesn't understand the nature of politics.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as
A bystander.
a bystander or being neutral in politics. Your silence is
well, we
a
don't know. We're
statement.
just
in
waking
a
Yes.
up
sense.
to that.
Your
Very
silence
loud
is a
statements,
statement.
We
yeah.
actually
So
we're
you can't
just
say you're standing
waking
on the
up
side.
to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And the other
Nigerians
thing
are
is,
just waking up to that.
And
Lots
not-
of times they're like, I know the politics is not for us, so
Yeah.
it's dirty. Yet
Yeah,
we are all
realize-
politically involved. There's no human being that is
whatever
not.
stance you
Can't
take
run away
is
from it.
politics.
Yes,
Can't run
Yeah,
away from it.
exactly.
And every other discipline actually is subject to politics.
Yeah.
Yes.
Science,